Hi, and welcome to part 4 of this PowerShell tutorial series. Today we're going to be going over hash tables and custom objects as the last part of the data structures. In the last video, we went over array and array lists. So today we're just going to be doing hash tables and custom objects. So hash tables are very similar to what most programming languages would have dictionaries. So it's a set of key value pairs. There's going to be a key and there's going to be a value associated to that key. This type of data structure is very useful for storing users in it to have the name associated to the username being the key and the name being the value. So that's going to be our example in this case here. So I already have our strict mode set on. We're just going to run this line just to be 100% positive that it's on. And then we are just going to create a variable, not initialize it, just to make sure we get the error, and we do. That is perfect. So to create a hash table, we are going to initialize it very similarly to an array. We're going to do $users equals @ and then curly brackets in this case. And then we're just going to press enter a few times to make some space in the middle there. And then here, the only thing that we have to do is type in our key equals and then a value. So let's go ahead and let's create a few users here. I'm going to create one called John S, which is going to be equal to John Smith, Bob T, which is going to be equal to Bob Test, and we are going to put Steve P as Steve Pickle. I really was running out of names there. So here we have our hash table. So let's go ahead and let's create this here. So, and let's go see what this data structure looked like. So we could print it out by just calling the variable, and we can see that we get a name and we get a value column. We have the name John S, Bob T, and Steve P. And we have the value of John Smith, Bob Test, and Steve Pickle. And if we do a get type on this object here, we are going to see that it comes out as a hash table, and it's an object, but it's a hash table. Now, I said that they were key value pairs, so we can actually, in PowerShell, see what all the keys are or what all the values are. So let's go ahead and let's look at that. So if we do users, and we do a dot notation here, and we're going to see that we see keys here. So let's go ahead and let's tab complete that, and let's run this line here. And we are going to see that we get all the keys back. So John S, Bob T, and Steve P. And we can get all the values by simply calling users dot, you guessed it, values. And we can run this here, and we get John Smith, Bob Test, and Steve Pickle. Now we can actually, just like array and array lists, we can actually specify exactly which one we want to get out. So instead of using index positioning, we are going to be using referencing by the key. So what that means here is if we reference the users and we put square brackets just as if it was an array, and we specify, let's specify Bob T, which is the second element here. We can pull that out and we see that we get Bob Test for Bob T. And then we can also add and remove anything in this hash table by doing some dot notation and a few other methods there. And every time that you're doing something with hash tables, usually there's two ways to do it. So we're going to be going over a few different ways here. So we can also reference Bob T by doing users dot Bob T, and we see that we get Bob Test here again. Now to add in, we're going to add in a few users. So Let's do users dot add, and then here we're going to add two values here. We are going to add the key and the value. So let's put in value of Mike C, and we are going to put the name as Mike Cummings. Let's run that here. And if we call our users hash table, we are going to be able to see our users here, which is John S, Bob T, Steve P, and Mike C. And we can see John Smith, Bob Test, Steve Pickle, Mike Cummings. Now we can also add them by simply creating a user using this key reference. So we're going to add another user here. So we're going to do users, square brackets, and we're going to put a user that we haven't created yet. So let's do test as our additional one, and we are going to put that equal to test user here. And then if we run the users command again to see what's been added, we can see John S, Bob T, Steve P, Test, Mike C. All right, and now we want to see if we can remove users. But before we remove or change a user in a hash table, we might want to see if they exist, because if I try to reference a user that doesn't exist, if we go into users and we try to reference testing here, we're going to see that even though we have the strict mode, we get nothing back. So this doesn't really help us, but there's actually something built into these hash tables that let us test this. So if we do a users dot contains key, and we do the key testing, and we run this here, we see that it comes back as false. So this goes back to our second tutorial with the Boolean values. So we would be able to test this in a conditional statement that if the user does contain the key, then we can remove it. If it comes back false, then we know it already doesn't contain it. So then if we do a user dot contains key, and we do the Steve P here, and we run this command, we see that it comes back to true. So let's go ahead and let's remove that user. So we got users dot remove, and let's do Steve P here. And now if we run the print command again on it, so we can print out of our users, we see that we have John S, Bob T, Test, and Mike C. So we have removed Steve P completely, and we can actually change them. So let's change Bob Test to Bob Tester. So if we do a users square brackets Bob T, and we make it equal to Bob Tester, and then we try to print out the users again, we are going to see that the Bob T is now Bob Tester. So we can change the value associated to the key. Now, another thing that you'd be able to use hash tables for example, is if we had a grocery store program, for example, we could have a hash tables with keys of all different types of items in the store, like bananas, canned tomatoes, pickles, cakes, and then we can store the value. We could store integer value, or in this case would probably be a double value actually of the price of that item. And we'd always be able to reference back to the hash table and get the price of said cake or said banana or said pickles. So we're going to be using hash tables quite a bit, but this last data structure that I'm about to show you is going to be used probably more often once we get into our advanced scripts and we need a lot more flexibility in our objects. So let me just make a little line here just to clearly separate the two, and that is custom objects. So there are multiple ways. There's two ways to really create custom objects. We're going to be going over both ways, and then we're just going to be doing a last little dive into them just to see what makes them great. So let's create a custom object here. We're going to create an object, a variable called dog. And we're going to be using the commandlet called new object. And then we're going to pass in a parameter of a type name, and that we are going to do PS custom object. And that is going to be enough to create this object. Now, there's going to be nothing in this. So if we print out this object, we see that nothing really there. There's not a whole lot to it. We can get an equals, get the hash code, we can get type, and we can do a toString, which doesn't really give us a whole lot right now. But what we can do is we can use this add member commandlet. And in the input object, we're going to put our dog object. And then for a member type, we are going to put a note property. So we're going to be adding a property to our object dog. And we are going to be naming our property name. And we are going to be storing the value of penny. And then we're going to add another member with the same input object for dog, the same member type. So we're going to be adding another property to this. We're going to be putting the name of that property as breed. So we're going to be storing the breed of the dog. We're going to put that value as pug. So if I run these 3 lines, now we can call dog and we will see it print out the name and breed. So we have the name Penny and we have the breed pug. But we can also do a dot notation and we can see that we can see the breed and we can see the name. So that's great. Now what we can also do with these custom objects, and we can actually do this with any kind of object, is we can do a get member commandlet, and we can pass in our object of dog in here. And we are going to get all the properties and all the methods that this object has. So we can see that PowerShell automatically creates these 4 methods for us here, that equals, get hash code, get type, and toString. But we also have our 2 properties that we added in. Now, this is going to come in handy later on when we get into more advanced scripts and coding. We're going to need to create objects to store maybe some methods, some properties, especially useful when we're going to start automating our Active Directory and other server items that we might want to automate. Now, the second way to create these custom objects is, again, we're going to create a variable. This time we're going to name it cat, and we are going to make it equal to some square brackets, PS custom object, and then we are going to do the @ symbol, curly brackets, and simply here what we need to do is we just need to put our properties. So we're going to put name, and we're going to name our cat Frankie, and then a semicolon, and we're going to put the breed, and we're going to create a Persian cat here. So if we run this command, and then we see what's in cat, we will see that we get the name and the breed as well. So these are two completely different ways of creating custom objects. Both are very good. One takes one line, the other one is multiple lines. I find the first one that we do is a little bit more visual and you can really see what's going on, whereas the second one, you don't really know what you're adding in. At least here we can specify property or method, um, and we can add a lot more member types than those two. Those are just the two most common ones that I've used. Um, and what we're going to be doing, like I said, is using these custom objects later on to store. Uh, like one of the most biggest examples that I can say is for an Active Directory user. We can store the name, the username, even though that stuff is stored in Active Directory, we can store it in our own objects and do some compares, store it in array lists. This way we aren't always having to go back to Active Directory to go look at it. Or if we have some CSV files which we don't have Active Directory, if your user base is going to be in CSV files, this would be another great option to create that. So that's it for this video here today. This goes over hash tables and custom objects. In the next video, we're going to be combining some commandlets together, which was with what's called a pipeline. So we're going to be piping commandlets to other commandlets, giving us a little bit more variety. And after that, we are going to be doing conditional statements and logic statements and are really starting to get our hands dirty with PowerShell. I will see you in the next video.